Only together with women, not by excluding them, and certainly not against them, can the working people win the struggle. Clara Zetkin, the woman who proposed IWD 109 years ago. Now, I have the pleasure to introduce Erin Cameron. She's going to speak about prison abolition, eliminating violence against women. Erin is a feminist who has been fighting for women's rights for over 30 years. She's a registered nurse, currently working at Sisters Inside, a prison abolitionist and a member of the Queensland Nurses Union. She has been involved in ongoing campaigns in Brisbane and previously in Victoria, where she lived for 10 years before returning to Brisbane. Let's welcome Erin.
Thanks, Adela. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on whose land we meet today and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge the strong women who have gone before us to fight for their rights and our rights, and obviously for all the strong women that are here today to continue that fight. Since colonisation in Australia, prisons have only ever expanded. Concerningly, there has been a recent and rapid shift towards privatisations of prisons. Under a business model, private prisons see each person incarcerated as a means of profit, and with the increase of the prison population ultimately being good for business. The most recent example we've actually seen of a private prison is right here in Queensland, and that's the Brisbane Women's Prison Act, Gatton. So that prison was opened late last year in response to the overcrowding at the Brisbane Women's Correctional Centre. It's actually run by Serco. And as we know, Serco has an appalling track record of human rights in prisons and detention centres, both here in Australia and globally. So with the growth of the prison industry, there has also been an increased number of women being sent to prison. Over the past decade, the total number of women in prison has skyrocketed by 85%. Alarmingly, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are seeing the greatest increase in prison numbers, with a 240% rise in the past 5 years. Of the female prison population, 34% are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, despite them only comprising just 2% of the broader female population. Prison greatly impacts and harms women, with even just one day in prison can destroy a woman's life. She can lose her kids, her home and her job. Research indicates that women are not actually committing more crimes, but what is identified, the reason for imprisonment is linked to broader social issues, particularly poverty. However, behind all these skyrocketing figures is an often overlooked fact, and that is that an overwhelming majority of women are survivors of violence. Women in prison are actually survivors of violence, with evidence suggesting between 70 and 90% of women in prison that have been physically, sexually or emotionally abused as children or adults. Once in prison, women are further traumatised within the male-dominated prison industrial complex, which can include the archaic and ineffective process of strip searching. In fact, the government is criminalising the very women it should be supporting. These are women who have survived terrible abuse and terrible violence. Instead of locking them up in prison, they should be supported within the community. So why is it then that women who have survived this violence, why are they ending up in jail? Firstly, homelessness. Violence is the biggest contributor to women's homelessness, and homelessness in turn is a huge driver of women's offending. Women will often lead to self-medicating to cope with trauma and mental illness, which then places them on the police radar. Numerous studies have detailed the links between poverty, homelessness and the high incarceration rates of women. In fact, national research indicates that more than half the women in prison were homeless in 1 month or in short-term accommodation 1 month prior to being sent to prison. Secondly, women are often forced by a violent partner to take the blame for his crimes. And women who fight back in self-defence after years of abuse can still end up in prison due to, at times, an ineffective judicial system which fails women who have been the victims of abuse. One emerging but alarming issue that is leading to the increased number of women in prison is the growing number of domestic violence victims being misidentified by police as primary aggressors. Data indicates that 60% of cases where women were named as respondents to intervention orders were actually misidentified, and they'd actually been reporting the abuse prior to the intervention order being misidentified. Here in Queensland in 2018, it was noted that rates of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women being charged with breaches of domestic violence protection orders had increased, often in circumstances where the police, rather than the intimate partner, had applied to impose the order. Misapplied intervention orders often prevent a woman from staying in her own home and from seeing her children. Therefore, when she tries to return home to see the children, she may breach that order and then be charged. Also relevant to women entering prison are the number of women with acquired brain injuries. Recent data from the UK indicated that 65% of women in a group of 173 had suffered an ABI as a result of injuries received from strangulation or punches to the head from a current male partner or ex-partner. Obviously, the prison environment would be more problematic and stressful for a woman with an acquired brain injury. It is obvious that the impact of violence on women and the incarceration rates of Australian female prisoners, especially Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, is substantial. So clearly things must change. There must be a focus to respond more effectively to men's violence against women, and then perhaps we wouldn't see the need to be spending more and more money on building more and more prisons to lock women up in. By relying on prisons, we are effectively abandoning women, and the call for greater incarceration and stronger laws adversely affects women, particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. Feminism that sees prison as an answer is no friend of women, especially the most marginalised women. While reform seeks to make prisons nicer, they ultimately keep the prison industrial complex in place. In addition, the male-dominated prison industrial complex fits perfectly within the patriarchal capitalist society that aims to keep women oppressed. We must move on from prisons and reform and seriously consider another option of prison abolition. This is not just about going and calling for all prisons to be shut down. Prison abolition pushes us to envision a way of addressing violence and creating safer communities without using forms of harm to do so. To build a world without prisons is to disrupt society built on inequity, patriarchal violence and colonisation. Prison abolition is about social change. Ultimately, prison abolition is about revolution. It is the fight for a world where women and girls are not treated as second class just for being born female, a world where abuse, rape and murder of women and girls is not seen as commonplace, and a world where women can be safe and free from violence and not locked up for being the survivors of violence. Thank you.